Hello and welcome to From the North. On today's podcast, we're joined by two people who live in unsafe homes they can't move from and they can't sell. It's 4 years since the Grenfell fire tragedy exposed the cladding and unsafe building scandal, and we're asking who's to blame and what's been the impact. We're joined by two people living in those homes. Danielle Williamson is a school teacher who lives in the Green Quarter in Manchester city centre, and Jake Brammer, who lives in Millennium Point, not far from here at Media City at Salford Quays. And he bought his apartment post Grenfell and was assured it was safe, and it isn't. Thank you both for joining us today. Danielle, tell us what it's like to be in your situation.
We were one of the first buildings in the country to go through this. We found out in July 2017 that we had similar cladding to Grenfell, flammable cladding. Terrifying, obviously. Eventually, after a lot of work from a steering committee in my building, we managed to get the developer and a consortium to pay for the replacement of the cladding. So we were incredibly grateful. We thought we were out of the woods and ready to get on with our lives. The government introduced the external wall survey whilst the replacement was happening. And we're pretty much back to square one now, 4 years on. We found out that we still have work to do until this building is safe. So it's just Groundhog Day here.
So when that letter came through, when you realised the building had failed, what was that moment like?
Just really, really upsetting. There have been a lot of tears, both from a financial point of view, and we can't really get our heads around the figures at the moment, but also our lives are just on pause. There are so many people that want to move to. I know the coronavirus has made people realize what they want from their homes. Lots of people want gardens, they want children, they want to start looking after their parents, and we just cannot move. So I would say that's almost as bad as the financial implications. We just feel stuck. So we were absolutely gutted.
And Jake, you share that, don't you? You feel completely stuck too, and locked in lockdown in a home that you don't feel safe in.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And it's a story that's happening up and down the country. You know, we've gone through a pandemic 15, 16 months on, and we're all living still in unsafe housing, not knowing how we're going to afford to fix our buildings, all the interim costs as well. It's not only the financial impact, it's the mental health impacts of firstly living in a home that's considered dangerous, and then the reality of essentially your home being taken away from you and facing bankruptcy. And that's what we're all facing ultimately.
And you're working at home as well, aren't you? And have done throughout the pandemic in a home that you don't feel safe in.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been living, breathing 24/7, the scandal that is happening, and you can't get away from it. I mean, it's fantastic when you're able to go to an office hopefully soon and just have that respite away from what is happening, but unfortunately we don't have it. So you're staring at the same four walls, knowing that them four walls are unsafe.
And as I said, you got your property in 2017 post Grenfell, and you'd been assured it was safe, or you wouldn't have bought it.
Absolutely, we did all the right checks that we should have done. Nothing was flagged to us. You know, we were naturally very concerned post Grenfell that, you know, could something else happen to the building that we were looking to buy, and we had all the assurances that everything was totally fine. And then a couple of years later, here we are with my case facing an £80,000 bill.
Danielle, you got some help in terms of a consortium. Has it cost you the work so far?
Not really, I don't think. It's this second wave that's going to hit us hard. So I'm incredibly grateful for the consortium. We did pay waking watch costs at the time, and they were covered too. But we had a residents meeting the night before last, and it was made clear that insurance is going to increase now that we're back in a flammable building. Something that shocked us to the core: the balconies need replacing. They're not covered by the Building Safety Fund. And there were quotes of up to £10,000 just to replace a few pieces of timber. I think people are on top of everything profiteering out of this. So we have the balconies, and we're waiting to hear from the Building Safety Fund. The deadline is the 30th of June. We've heard about people in our situation that have been turned down. So at the moment, we're looking at costs of about £36,000, which, funnily enough, feels like small fry compared to some of the figures that's how warped the situation is now. You start to think maybe I'm one of the lucky ones for only having, sums of £36,000 over my head.
These are huge sums, and some people are saying they're going to have to, hand their keys back. They have to walk away. They've declared themselves bankrupt. What are your neighbours saying in terms of the impact? And you said, these are flammable. What is it like living, working, spending a lot of time in lockdown in a house where you don't feel safe?
It's horrendous. Pretty much every night I go to bed, and I think when I'm lying there, I just think, okay, where are our shoes? I'll have to grab the pet rabbit. This is something. Where are our coats? I have that thought every night, and that's just not normal to feel like this. We're on the 9th floor where we are, and I've seen things on Twitter, people buying rope ladders. I just can't believe that this is the UK in 2021, that we're having these conversations. I feel really abandoned by the government.
And Jake, I've met a number of people in your building, lots of families, and heard those stories of people coming up with a plan to have a hoist, to be able to hoist their children outside if there was a fire. What are people telling you?
It's the same situation here. So I live on the 7th floor. Thankfully, I don't have children. I don't have to think, how on earth would I get my children out of the building should the worst happen? But we have got a bag full of stuff should we need it, should the worst happen. We've gone ahead and done that. It's the same across in the building next to us in Millennium Tower. We are one development. And the people higher up, they haven't got the luxury of a rope ladder, for example. If you're on the 17th floor, you cannot get out of that building. And like Danielle has said, this is the UK in 2021. People should not be buying rope ladders, having a safe bag, thinking where my shoes are, thinking how on earth am I going to essentially, how on earth am I going to get out of this building in a relatively quick amount of time, whilst everything else crumbles down around you? It shouldn't be happening.
And when you go to bed, is that on your mind regularly?
Every single night. Everybody has stresses that they go to bed with, but it is not normal to go to bed thinking, is this the night when I hear a fire alarm that one of the flats is on fire and it's going to rip through the building? One of the issues that we have in our buildings is there's essentially a gap between some floors which would allow smoke and flames to wrap around the building. That should never be happening. I generally don't understand how that would have even been signed off in the first place. So that is something that is on everybody's minds every single night, and living with it, it's a constant nightmare.
Now, for you to hear that the work has been done on Danielle's apartment block and it's failed, you haven't even got to that stage yet.
It's absolutely a real concern, because first of all, we've got the financial impact, and then if work was to go ahead and somehow people manage to find these ludicrously huge sums of money, it may turn around, like in Danielle's case, that we end up having to pay again for more works. Things keep on seeming to creeping out of the woodwork. The timber balconies, for example, it is another thing that apparently needs to be replaced. And yes, £10,000 is a ridiculous quote for just a couple of lines of wood, ultimately. I do fear that if we were to go ahead and press on and we were able to get funding, whatever it may be, and it presses on, we'll get to that EWS1 stage and then we'll fail again. And then it's just another lottery of money that's going to be taken off us.
And Danielle, you mentioned feeling forgotten about, abandoned and ignored. So when you hear the government say, from ministers to the Prime Minister saying consistently, leaseholders shouldn't have to pay, it's not your fault, the developers and the freeholders should do the right thing, you shouldn't be paying, but you are paying, does it make you just want to scream?
Yes, it's a bit of a roller coaster. I think now I'm just I'm just used to hearing them say it and know that it's utterly empty words. It just feels like they just keep saying it to bat people away. I know that a couple of the big groups, Manchester Gladiators, I think, and maybe another one, met with Stephen Greenhouse today. And it just feels like it's just a bit of a tick box for him. Yep, I met with the Gladiators. It doesn't feel like anything concrete is coming out of anything. I wouldn't say they've got any plans to help leaseholders at this stage. That's not what it feels like. They just keep mentioning the building safety fund. And yes, that will help some people, but only buildings over 18 meters. People are funding balconies. Anything other than cladding is not covered. It's a very niche fund, and it can only help some people, but they think that's enough at this stage, and it's not.
Interestingly, you say there isn't a plan, because when we spoke to Robert Jenrick, the Secretary of State, last month, he said, we have a clear plan. We have a clear plan to support the leaseholders who are in this very difficult position. And as you say, mentioned the £5 billion fund, which is going to pay for the removal of the unsafe cladding. But again, you said people shouldn't have to pay, and then talks about a loan scheme where people are going to pay £50. So you're in this situation, you've talked about the stress, the mental health impact, and then when you are asking questions, simple questions as to why I have to pay, you said I don't have to pay, but why are my bills coming through? Does that just exacerbate everything because you feel as though nobody is listening?
I can see where they're coming from. I think goalposts have changed. You know, studies are being undertaken all the time, and they are finding out that new materials are flammable, etc. I understand that this is an ongoing process, but my argument would be the people that can least afford this are the leaseholders. We're talking about these developers making millions and maybe even billions of profit. And it may not be some of the developers' fault. They may have built buildings to regulation at the time, and I completely get that. But common sense must prevail. You know, teachers, doctors, my partner's a doctor. We don't have that money. The developers do, the government do. And it's the government's duty to keep its people safe from harm.
And do you feel, Jake, that it is all on your shoulders, that the developers aren't being asked? In some cases, some of them have said they'll pay a little bit of this, or they're starting the conversations. But at the moment, do you feel the bills are all on your shoulders?
I do, yes. So I know that the government has said 2 billion will be coming from developers over 10 years. So what, £200 million? That is really a drop in the ocean compared to some of these developers' profits. And with our situation in my building, the developer went bust at the time of build. So we don't even have recourse with the developer. And we've also been rejected from the Building Safety Fund. So our avenue now is the bills will fall on leaseholders. So we are completely forgotten about by the government in this. And, you know, our cladding's actually perfectly fine, apparently. It's everything that's behind it. So we are completely forgotten about. And I echo what Danielle's saying, in that we are forgotten. Leaseholders are being forgotten. We are the ones that least can afford this. And realistically, the government does have a duty of care to its public. I understand as well that, yes, things have changed over the years. You know, we've learned that various different materials are flammable, but at the same time, it can't fall on leaseholders to rectify the mistakes of others. If we were to own a car, it would be recalled and the manufacturer would fix it. In the same way as if you own a kettle, you can take it back and it would be fixed. The biggest purchase that we've all done, which is our property, should kind of have the same kind of thought process behind it, and it absolutely isn't. And it's a passing the buck exercise ultimately, and it's just being passed on to leaseholders, and we've been completely forgotten about by the government. They come out with nice quotes for TV, push things away, ignore the situation, but we are facing an absolutely monumental housing crisis due to the building safety scandal.
And also, as you said, though, the mental health impact of this is just as important. What are your neighbours and others in the support groups that you're drawing support from? What are they telling you?
It's everybody is really, really struggling. I mean, I myself go through so many emotions every single day, and luckily I've got a very supportive employer that will allow me to take time off if I do need it. That's not going to be the same for everybody, and it isn't even in our buildings. You know, people are being run into the ground just by the thought of, you know, living in a flammable house. How am I going to find these bills? The interim charges themselves are crippling people. Our insurance, our service charge has gone up by 40, 50, 60% this year alone. You know, the sheer mental health impact of essentially losing everything you've ever worked for is absolutely ridiculous. And people are really struggling across all of our buildings, and you see it across all the support groups, you know, and luckily the support groups are there. People like the Manchester Gladiators have been absolutely fantastic and putting their own time in, their own evenings, their own days, just to try and offer people some direction. And without them, I dread to think where a lot of people would be.
And what more can you do? I know there's a protest planned outside your buildings, Danielle, in the Northern Quarter, just to keep this on the agenda. I know George Clark, the architect whose house was in the shadow of Grenfell, he saw the inferno and he's been very, very supportive. You've organised meetings, you've done petitions, you've campaigned, you've shared your stories and talked about the impact. What more can you do?
We're not sure, but we're not going to give up. That's for sure. We're just trying to make as much noise as we can. It's great for us now that restrictions are easing, because that's all we wanted to do during lockdown was get out on the streets and just scream this message. So we have got a couple of things up our sleeves with regards to that. And then it's just badgering people as much as we can. We're trying to speak to our MPs, some of which pretty much ignore us, but we will keep trying. And yeah, there's a lot of strength in the groups. There's a lot of good ideas, but ultimately it's just to keep making noise until something positive happens.
And some of these developers have big contracts by big local authorities in our area. Should they be taking more of a stand against the developers to make sure, put the pressure on to make sure they do the right thing?
Massively. We had this before, 3 or 4 years ago. We begged the council to do the right thing and to not award a certain developer a project, and we were ignored, which was absolutely devastating. Yeah, we felt really let down by our council as well. So they should not be offering developers new projects when their current projects are putting people's lives in danger.
And what's the situation now that your new work has failed? It's still unsafe. You know, is there any redress? Have you had any advice from government on what happens next?
No, so we just had our first residents meeting 2 nights ago since we found out that we'd failed, and we're just desperately pushing our management agent to get all the information into the Building Safety Fund. That's what we're pinning our hopes on at the moment. We need to get quotes for everything, and we need to get that in just under a month. So that's where we're putting all our energies at the moment. If we don't get money from the Building Safety Fund, then we're in the same boat as many other people in the country, and I'm not sure where we'll go from there. Can't think that far ahead.
What can you do when you feel as though I haven't done anything wrong? I have, you know, it's good to get on the property ladder. It's good to save. It's good to have an investment. It's good to have, look after your future. And then to be in this position, both of you kind of sum that up for us. And, you know, what is your message if Robert Jenrick was sat here today?
My message for Jenrick is to just do the right thing. Ultimately, we are the people that are least able to pay for these remediation bills. We are the only party in the whole of this scandal that has done nothing wrong. We're the only party, as Baroness Pinnock said when the debate on the fire safety bill was going through, who've done everything right. And so I would say to him to just essentially take a step back. Let's look at the reality of where these bills are going to fall ultimately, and let's protect the people that can't afford to pay these bills. They are going to bankrupt hundreds of thousands of people, and then they've got a housing crisis at the end of the day on the back of this. So that would be my message to Robert Jenrick.
But some people will say we've gone through this pandemic, it's been hugely costly. They might say the government just doesn't have that money either. What do you say to that?
I would say that the government has a duty of care to its people at the end of the day. I completely understand the amount of money that has been sent, essentially saving our lives, making sure that people are not made unemployed by the pandemic. And everything that has been done in relation to that is, it's absolute. I get that. But at the same time, I'd ask people to just put themselves into the position that we are in. If you had a bill for 30, 40, 50,000, 80,000 pound popped through your letterbox, there was through no fault of your own whatsoever, how would you feel? And I'm sure in that situation, people will be thinking, this is unjust. Something must be done. It's the victims that shouldn't be paying for this ultimately. And we are the victims of this.
And is there a danger you and your partner could lose your jobs if you can't afford to pay these bills?
Yeah, so my partner is a qualified accountant. He would lose his career. He can't be an undischarged or a discharged bankrupt and work in that industry. The same for me. I actually work with debt myself, so I'm very much aware of the consequences of what could come along. And if I was to be made bankrupt, yes, I could also lose my job. So I'm 33. My partner is 38. It's that kind of daunting prospect of starting again as we're approaching our 40s, and I don't know. It's just a massive worry for us. We've done everything right, and we're essentially having everything ripped away from us through no fault of our own. And it just drives us absolutely up the wall, to be honest.
And I've met some of your neighbours who say they wanted to start a family, and they put that on hold. Others were saying they wanted to get married, and they just they've put that on hold. Nobody can look to the future. Is that how you feel, Danielle? Is sort of life on hold?
Completely. We got engaged in February. I've not given a second thought to the wedding. It's just not something I can process right now. I need to put all my energy into this. We would love to start a family. I'm not going to do that in a city centre flat. That's not what I envisaged for me. So people are desperate to move on with their lives and not have these bills. And yeah, the government need to help us.
And your message to Robert Jenrick?
I have a few things. I'd like the Building Safety Fund deadline to be extended. It's too rushed. We're panicking. And the government need a consistent risk-based approach. The goalposts keep changing. Even now they're changing. I've heard that somebody that's got a very similar balcony to me has passed their fire safety check. We've failed. I just don't understand how that can be. There are too many inconsistencies in this process. I really don't think they know what they're doing. Somebody just needs to get hold of this and sort it out once and for all.
And is it a question for you of just fairness? This just isn't fair.
Pretty much, yes. I have a very strong moral compass. I struggle with injustice, and like I said earlier, I fully understand that it may not actually be anybody's fault, but we cannot afford it. This will ruin our lives. We need help from people who can afford it. We need help from their profits so that we can just put this behind us.
And a final thought, Jake and Danielle, if we're here in another couple of years and things haven't progressed, what are the implications of that for you and the people your neighbours in the same apartment blocks?
Well, for us, we can't afford to carry on doing this. The interim charges alone are crippling us. We've had to pay for Waking Watch, for example. We've had to pay for alarms being fitted. As has been mentioned, the goalposts are constantly moving. So, buildings insurance is rocketing up. There's a huge amount of profiteering. We can't carry on as we are. Just these bills alone are going to bankrupt us. So if it was to carry on for 2 years, I dread to think where people will actually be, again, financially, but also mentally. It's a huge toll on absolutely everybody to be living this day in, day out. And therefore, I would I would ultimately echo the sentiment of what Danielle said, which is, let's look to what other countries have done to solve this crisis. Let's look to Australia. Let's look at that risk-based system, which can pull hundreds of thousands of flats, hopefully, out of the requirement for remediation. I think the government just needs a bit of a rocket to look at how we actually go ahead and fix this, because the interim charges alone, like I said, are absolutely crippling us. We can't afford them.
And Danielle, in 2 years' time, hopefully you will have had your wedding. Congratulations.
Yeah.
But in this situation continues, your thoughts?
I've purposefully tried not to think that too far ahead, because I become overwhelmed and I become really, really upset. But in reality, it dawned on me the night before last at that meeting, I will be in this situation because there are that many works that need doing all over the country, and there's only a certain number of qualified engineers. So I'm pretty sure we will be here. But I can't think that far ahead at this stage. I just have to keep focusing on today and doing what I can to try and make the government listen.
And has it destroyed for both of you the dream of city centre living?
I want out big time. I just want out. I'd love to live somewhere with a garden, somewhere quiet, peaceful. This isn't where I wanted to be in my mid-30s.
Yeah, absolutely the same. I would, I hugely regret buying my flat. I hugely regret buying into leasehold. I regret everything of the last 4 years, basically. And I feel like not only is my life on hold, but my life is littered with, hindsight. And it shouldn't be like that. We should be very happy living where we are, none of us are.
Well, we will continue to keep telling your story. Thank you so much for talking to us tonight on the podcast from the North.
Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you.